Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we discuss an emerging initiative, the State of the World Forum, and also the impact that it has on Humanity Rising, our daily broadcast. Before we dive into those very interesting domains, I feel compelled to comment on what has happened today in Gaza as the Israelis, backed up by the United States, blanket bombed Gaza, breaking the ceasefire and killing, by official counts, 461 people, mostly women and children, and hundreds more injured with no end in sight. It's very important for us to just take in what's happening in Gaza. Today marks the 18th day that all food, water, fuel, aid, and any humanitarian supplies of any kind have been allowed into Gaza. And now the Israelis are engaging once again in mass slaughter. It's hard to take this in. And I want to make a couple of comments before we go into our subject, because as you all know, I consider what is going on in Gaza to be a crime of crimes. That the people who went through a Holocaust are now exacting a Holocaust on their cousins in broad daylight, 24/7 on the global news. And creating, as Gabor Mate has said, a Jew who survived the Holocaust in Hungary out of the Second World War. He says that what's happening in Gaza at the hands of the Israelis and the Jewish people is one of the worst crimes in all of Jewish history. For a people of the book to be engaging in this level of criminality before the entire world is shocking at a level that it's hard to take in. The one comment that I want to make is just to emphasize the complicity of the United States. It's emerged today in the news that the United States was consulted by Netanyahu. And when Stephen Wyckoff was in the Middle East in Doha last week, and then went to Israel, and then went on to Moscow and other places, even while they were engaging in negotiations with Hamas in Doha, the United States had already approved the Israeli breaking of the ceasefire and using American bombs to engage in slaughter. The plan is clearly, as Trump has been articulating it and the Israelis have been enthusiastically preparing, is for a mass exodus under U.S.-Israeli coercion to get the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza out of Gaza so that they can turn it into Trump Towers and Trump Club Med and move forward the Israeli genocide of the Palestinians, the next step, something that they have been engaging in for the last 100 years. What the Germans did to the Jews was genocide in a hurry. What the Jews are doing to the Palestinians, what the United States is doing to the Palestinians, what the Europeans are doing to the Palestinians is genocide in slow motion. And we all just need to know that it's happening. And however we can, raise our voices. I want to deepen this because I feel, as you all know, more strongly about this issue than certainly I feel about Ukraine, for example. Because there's no genocide going on in Ukraine. There's just a war. I've mentioned that most of the bombs and weapons and so forth being used by the Israelis say made in USA. But I think we need at this moment to go a little deeper as we begin to understand what the Trump administration means by making America great again. What we're seeing is welfare being turned into warfare. And the tariffs against commercial goods, against the items that people buy, are all being tariffed and taxed to make them more expensive. And meanwhile, there's not been a single cut in the defense budget. And in fact, the Republicans in the House of Representatives last week voted to raise the defense budget. And I want to dwell on this for a moment because it's so important for us to understand. And when I then segue to the State of the World Forum, you'll understand the urgency that's burning in my heart and Tom Eddington's heart and others that are beginning to work on the State of the World Forum for why it's so important. If you look at government documents in the Pentagon, they chronicle that from 1798 to 2023, the United States engaged in 469 interventions outside the United States. If you count the wars that were conducted internally against the native peoples, it adds another several hundred to that number. According to government documents, just since 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in the aftermath of the Cold War, the United States has engaged in 251 covert military disruptive interventions around the world. And what that means is that over 50%, approaching 2/3 of all the military covert operations of the United States in its entire history has happened within the last 30 years. As the United States has desperately tried to enforce full spectrum dominance over the rest of the planet. I've mentioned before that the United States spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. That comes to about $1 trillion a year. And the Chinese spend about 250 billion, a quarter of that. And the Russians spend 50 to 75 billion, uh, basically around 10%. If you add the 500 billion or so that's not counted in the official budget, the United States is spending on its military more than the top 20 countries in the world combined. And I was doing some research on this, and I discovered that weapons sales, the United States is the largest weapons manufacturer and the weapons salesman in the world, selling 7 times more than the Chinese, 5 times more than the Russians, to account for nearly 50% of all the weapons sales in the world. So what we're seeing under this administration, following on with the Biden administration, is not only a perpetuation of the genocide in Gaza and the West Bank against the Palestinians in an effort now to force them all out, but a military and economic policy formation that will begin to savage the human welfare budgets and indicators, Social Security, Medicare, welfare, humanitarian relief around the world. Anything having to do with human welfare is being cut to the bone. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, which came in 2016 saying that the NATO countries needed to increase their military spending to 2% of their gross domestic product, is now insisting that they increase the military spending to 5% of GDP. And so Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, has just announced an $800 billion loan debt financing in Europe, all of which will go to the US arms manufacturers to begin to arm Europe in accordance with the desires of the Trump administration. So as we try to fathom the mercurial, idiosyncratic, seemingly unpredictable mind of Donald Trump, we need to understand that there's a method to the madness. And that is, in his own way, even though he realizes that the United States has lost in Ukraine, that basic commitment to full spectrum dominance and massive military budgets is undiminished, undiluted, and in fact gaining momentum. That's part of the state of the world in which we find ourselves. And it's our capacity to look this reality ruthlessly in the eye and understand the magnitude of the darkness that presides in the Oval Office of the White House, that gives us the clarity the acuity of mind to know what must be done. Protests are, of course, being organized all around the country, increasingly in Europe. There have been protests in Israel, even today, by the families of the hostages, who know now that for all practical purposes, they may never see their loved ones again because of the insatiable appetite, addiction that the Israelis and the Americans have for war. All the Arab countries are speaking out. The Secretary General, Gutierrez, said that what's happening today in Gaza is shocking, he said, beyond words, particularly within the context of nearly 3 weeks of a complete blocking of any aid or food or water or supplies. So what do we do? What should be done in this context? I think there are a couple of things that can and should be done. One is that I think it is important for those who are working for a better world to come together and self-consciously understand that as we enter now into the Trump presidency, which is going to last, all things being equal, through 2028, that we need to bring people together in a concerted way over that time to take counsel from the multiple sectors that represent both the code red issues of our time, some ways the code green issues of our time, those initiatives that are maintaining momentum in spite of the onslaught against them. So to look at both the crises and the opportunities simultaneously and take counsel together as to how we connect the dots and how we begin this process of transforming conversations that matter into actions that make a difference. Because in the end, faith without works is dead. If you don't do something about what you know becomes what you do not know. So the basic impulse that has been emerging over the last 5-6 months toward a new State of the World Forum to do now between 2025 and 2030 in the spirit of what many of us came together to do between 1995 and the year 2000 with Mikhail Gorbachev at the end of the Cold War, to contemplate in a global, multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, and heartful way what can be done to ensure that the ending of mutual assured destruction could engender a peace dividend. That kind of conversation is what we need now. Because the strategic meta strategy of authoritarianism is isolation and fear. And so what we have to engage in this moment, in addition to everything else we're doing, is to come together as one. And that's what the State of the World Forum ultimately seeks to catalyze. A global brain trust dedicated to understanding what's happening in our world when the centrifugal forces are literally rending our world apart and creating fear and isolation amongst us. And this is what we did with Humanity Rising back during the pandemic, as many of you know. Within days of the lockdowns in March, April of 2020, as we were all in isolation, in fear, in our homes, we brought through this broadcast a free service to everybody to come together in community and contemplate the deep issues of our time. And we've been doing it ever since. And the Humanity Rising community with people from over 130 countries has endured and thrived. That needs to now happen in a much more profiled, public, and intentional way. As we think of the structure and design of the State of the World Forum, as it's beginning to emerge, we've been looking for what are the new ingredients that we need to take into consideration, and what are the new methodologies that need to be considered and utilized to enhance participation and empowerment. There are a number. One is runaway climate change. Back between 1995 and 2000, Bill McKibben and Amory Lovins and Lester Brown and the various environmentalists who were there at the forum all spoke passionately about climate change. But the climate and the weather was relatively calm. So there were predictions about runaway climate change. Today, those predictions have all been fulfilled. There was also conversations about artificial intelligence as an idea, as something that was emerging. From 1995 to 2000 was before the internet. So there were computers for sure, personal computers since really the 1980s, 1985, when the Macintosh first came out. So computers were very new. But there was enough progress that was made that artificial intelligence was already a concept. And again, there were discussions and predictions that if we didn't regulate AI, it could do serious damage to human welfare. And now those concerns are coming to pass. There was very little conversation at all during the original forum about pandemics. Those were historical events like the Spanish flu and beginning in 1918, or the bubonic plague back during the Middle Ages in the late 14th century in Europe. But no one really considered a massive pandemic in our world. And yet, COVID happened. And we now are in a world not only of runaway climate change, runaway AI, but a world in which a pandemic can happen at any time, against which most of us will be defenseless. And then, of course, there's the issue of the imminence of nuclear war, closer now than at any time since 1945. And in the middle of it all, what is also emerging is the reality that non-human intelligences, advanced beings, extraterrestrials, have been appearing on our planet in force and with intention since the United States dropped the first bombs in 1945, warning us to cease our destructiveness against each other and against the earth, telling us that our precious little planet is rare and beautiful and ecologically diverse and dense in ways that almost don't exist in the known universe. And our species, with alacrity, is destroying ourselves and the planet upon which we live. So as the crises deepen, the extraterrestrials become more apparent with the same consistent message: transform or lose your place in the precious ecosystem that has produced you for a purpose you have yet to discover. Bringing all these aspects of what's happening on our planet together at this time in a sustained way could be, in my view, the catalyst that could change everything. Why? Because this interface between the non-human intelligences that have come to our world with the message of transformation are, in an extraordinary, miraculous way, activating consciousness around the world. So even as the forces of darkness are deepening in their malignancy, the activation of human consciousness and mental telepathy and clairvoyance of all kinds is beginning to seep out also And in one of the most extraordinary ironies and acts of grace, the carriers of the consciousness, the clairvoyance, the telepathy that we all need to learn, apparently, is being incarnated among those who are autistic, the autists. So the most physically challenged amongst us are the geniuses who can not only engage in mental telepathy, they can tap into the Akashic field. They can learn multiple languages almost instantaneously. They can heal. They can meet in the etheric realms. They can communicate with the ancestors. They can predict the future. And many of them are in bodies that can't even speak. Our challenge in this time, within the context of bringing people together so that we can connect all the dots, including the extraterrestrial dot, is the opportunity for humanity to upgrade its consciousness and learn the language of consciousness en masse for the first time. It's an extraordinary moment where all of us, every single one of us, needs to learn mental telepathy, remote viewing, clairvoyance of all kinds. It's what's coming up out of the collective unconscious, activated by the extraterrestrials who are coming down out of the heavens and from other dimensions. And if you think about it, this is why they don't land on the White House lawn. That's what we want them to do what we would do, just land on the White House lawn. They understand what we are only beginning to understand. And that is that the solution to every problem that we have, which has brought us to the brink of self-destruction, won't be solved by anybody taking over. It will only be solved by escaping Einstein's box. That the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve the problem. So what do we need? We need higher consciousness. And that's what's beginning to appear around the world. And that's what's beginning to become apparent to more and more people around the world. So just imagine a great gathering of humanity between 2025 and 2030. Probably the most consequential years, maybe in human history, which are about ready to unfold. And we consider deeply the nature of reality with ruthless realism, like I started this session with, and yet with an absolutely sublime optimism that we are the carriers of a capacity that all of us have even the most seemingly unfortunate amongst us. And if we would only learn this mother tongue, learn the language of consciousness, learn how to communicate intelligibly with other sentient beings, the very process of learning this new language is what will usher in the compassion of the heart, the empathy of the soul, the clarity of the mind to be able to solve the issues that can only be remedied with the new consciousness we currently do not possess, but which resides in every single one of us. And now we have the opportunity to learn it. That's what the State of the World Forum is dedicated to manifesting in history at this time. And why I believe very deeply that if we are graced, we can make the kind of difference that all of us so desperately seek to make at this time. And this leads me to the future of Humanity Rising. As you will remember, during all of 2020, Georg and I and Rick Buckley and others basically went 7 days a week. And then starting in 2021, since then, we've been going basically 1 5-day week at a time, Monday through Friday. It's been an extraordinary labor of love. I had the very, very good fortune of developing a partnership with a number of people, but principally Tom Eddington, who, as you all know, has really become the co-convener of Humanity Rising and has been preparing program after program with both a profound depth of commitment and heartfulness, but also bringing together some of the most extraordinary hearts and minds out there on a range of issues of deep human concern. As Tom and I began to really develop, I would say, a momentum around State of the World Forum, which, as you can imagine, is considerable. We are closing in on the Omni Shoreham Hotel here in Washington, D.C. for a major conference, State of the World Forum 1, December 14th through 19th. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of land in Northwest Washington on 11 acres. So there's plenty of opportunity to be indoors and outdoors. And even though it'll be in December, we wanted to have some access to nature so we can commune with the orbs and with the ETs who we hope will grace us with their invisible support. But what that means is that it is no longer possible for Tom and I would say me in particular, who's at this every single day, to continue doing it 5 days a week. So what we have decided to do after very deep reflection is to go over the next couple of weeks. Tom has a final 5 day 6-day program. I think it's from the 7th to the 11th of April. And it's going to be on women. And as we were reflecting on it, we thought that's perfect, perfect symmetry. Because those of you who will remember the beginning of Humanity Rising, starting on May 22nd, 2020, we went the first 10 days only with women to honor the wisdom that women have for our time. So it felt almost mythopoetic that Tom had convened this week uh, about women. And then after that week, we will continue with Humanity Rising, but one day a week on Fridays. And I will be present and provide either commentary on world events, if that's what is up as events unfold, to talk about the different courses and opportunities, whether it's the State of the World Forum or our pilgrimage to Chartres this July, or some of the courses in our extraterrestrial studies programs and some of the new partners that we're bringing on, all dedicated to enhancing humanity's awareness of the extraterrestrials and the technologies that we can use to develop our clairvoyance and our capacity for intelligible communication with these beings. Just imagine a world in which there are working groups between extraterrestrials and humans on climate change, on how to regulate AI, pandemics, how to clean up the environment. Just imagine that. That's what's possible for humanity. And this is what the State of the World Forum wants to bring together to explore. But in order to do that, I have to have more time because there are physical limits to the universe for all of us. Now, having said all that, I want to also indicate that this is good enough for now. We went 7 days, then 5 days, and now we're going to go one day. But once we get going with the State of the World Forum and things begin to take shape, we see humanity rising, rising again at the appropriate time, when we can begin to calibrate not only for the issues that need to be considered, but the time that also we need to be able to allocate. So this move is not permanent to one day a week. We'll continue to monitor the situation, but we believe that the major focus for Tom and I really needs to be on the emerging State of the World Forum. And for me, continue to building and expanding the extraterrestrial studies program, which is the only program anywhere in the world within an academic framework that is actively teaching people what's going on with the ETs, who they are, why they're here, and how we can establish contact, communication, and ongoing community with these advanced beings, almost all of whom are here out of deep concern for humanity and deep love for the preciousness of the planet that we inhabit. So thank you, everyone. These are deep issues. They're issues that require reflection and contemplation. These are initiatives of the soul that are beginning to emerge with guidance, in my experience, from an intelligence that is not my own. And this is what gives me so much passion for the State of the World Forum. It's coming from the other side. It's coming from the invisible realms. It's coming from the plant kingdom. It's coming from the celestial realms. And this is ultimately how history is moved to bend toward justice, is when impulses emerge out of the depths of our psyches, out of the subterranean recesses of the collective unconscious, out of Gaia, who created us for a divine purpose and is now working with us and through us in deeply mysterious ways, her wonders to perform. It's such an honor. It's such a privilege to be with all of you on this journey. I thank you for your understanding. I thank you for your support and love. I love you all very, very dearly. And that will conclude our session for today. I will join the after chat for a bit. I had said to several people we could talk about matters in the after chat, those of you who would like to join. And then over the next 3 days of this week, Deanna Rice will be back talking about how under current world circumstances, we can engage in very simple but profoundly impactful self-healing and self-empowering exercises. So thank you, everyone. You'll see the link to the after chat in the chat box. Stan has just put it in, and you receive the link to the after chat, those of you who would like to deepen your discussion on these matters with me and others. And then we'll see everybody here tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.